Insidious. Out of the Further ending explained. What really happens to Gemma? Warning: major spoilers. The ending of Insidious. Out of the Further reveals that Gemma's unusual ability isn't simply the power to enter the Further. She can bring physical objects and entities out of it and into the real world. When Cyrus and the spirits try to exploit that ability, Gemma turns her power against them, ultimately transporting her entire house and the demons inside it into the Further. So, what really happens at the end of Insidious? Out of the Further? The sixth movie in the Insidious franchise introduces a completely new family and a new supernatural ability that changes how the Further works. This time, the danger isn't simply that someone might become trapped inside the Further. The danger is that the Further can come out. At the center of the story is Gemma, played by Amelia Eve, a single mother raising her daughter Maya in the same house where Gemma experienced a traumatic childhood. And that house is connected to something much darker than Gemma realizes. Why is Gemma connected to the Further? Gemma has always believed that her mother, Ingrid, was mentally unstable. As a child, Gemma watched her mother's behavior become increasingly frightening before Ingrid eventually died by suicide. Gemma grows up believing that her mother was simply suffering from addiction and mental illness. But the truth is much more complicated. Gemma and her mother share a rare supernatural ability. They aren't just capable of entering the Further. They can actually bring things from the Further back into the physical world. This makes Gemma different from most of the people we've seen in the franchise. Elise and other astral travelers can enter the Further. Gemma can effectively act as a bridge between both worlds. And that's exactly why the entities want her. Who is Cyrus? The main villain is Cyrus, a powerful spirit connected to a group of followers known as the Acolytes. Unlike some of the silent supernatural creatures from previous Insidious movies, Cyrus has a specific goal. He wants to escape the Further and bring other spirits with him. But there's a problem. The entities can't simply walk into the physical world whenever they want. They need someone capable of creating that connection. And Gemma is the perfect person. Her ability essentially gives Cyrus access to the world of the living. That turns Gemma from a victim into something much more important. A gateway. What is Gemma's real power? Gemma initially doesn't understand the full extent of her ability. She learns that she can travel into the Further, but eventually discovers that she can also transport physical objects between the two worlds. One of the clearest demonstrations comes when she moves a television from the real world into the Further. That moment seems strange at first, but it establishes the rule that becomes crucial during the finale. If Gemma can move an object into the Further, then theoretically, she can move something much bigger. Eventually, she realizes that her ability may be powerful enough to transport an entire physical space. And that becomes her solution. How does Elise help Gemma? Elise Rainier, played by Lin Shaye, returns to guide Gemma. Even though Elise's relationship with the Further has always been complicated, she understands the supernatural world better than almost anyone. She helps Gemma understand that the key to defeating Cyrus isn't necessarily fighting him directly. Gemma needs to understand her own ability. Elise essentially encourages her to clear her mind and recognize that the rules of the Further aren't as restrictive as Gemma believes. That's what allows Gemma to turn her ability against the entities. What happens to Maya? Maya becomes central to the final confrontation because the spirits use her connection to Gemma as part of their plan. Gemma is desperately trying to get back to her daughter, while the house is being overrun by supernatural entities. For a while, it appears that Gemma may not be able to save Maya. The demons have gained too much control, and Gemma is caught between the Further and the real world. But Elise helps Maya survive the attack, giving Gemma the opportunity she needs to fight back. How does Gemma defeat the demons? This is the biggest twist in the ending. Gemma realizes she doesn't have to defeat every demon individually. Instead, she can change where the demons are. Remember, Gemma can transport physical objects between worlds. So rather than trying to force the demons out of her house one by one, she does something much more extreme. She transports the entire house into the Further. The physical structure itself is pulled across the boundary between worlds. The result is that Gemma effectively traps the supernatural entities inside their own realm. Instead of allowing the Further to invade her world, she reverses the invasion. The house disappears from the real world, leaving behind essentially an empty section of land and damaged electrical connections. It's a clever reversal of the franchise's traditional formula. Usually, characters are trying to escape the Further. Gemma realizes she can take the battlefield into the Further. What happens to Cyrus? Cyrus' plan ultimately fails. He wanted to use Gemma's power to escape the Further and bring his followers into the physical world. Instead, Gemma uses that exact ability against him. Cyrus is trapped with the other entities. His desire to enter the real world becomes the reason he loses access to it. That's the central irony of his defeat. He believed Gemma was his doorway out. Instead, she becomes the reason he stays trapped inside. Does Gemma die?
No.
Gemma survives. She successfully escapes the immediate danger and saves Maya. More importantly, she finally understands what her ability actually means. She's no longer simply a frightened woman being hunted by supernatural forces. She now understands that she has control over the boundary between the Further and the living world. And that could become extremely important if the franchise continues. What about Gemma's mother? The ending also changes how we should understand Ingrid. For most of Gemma's life, she believed her mother was simply a troubled woman whose behavior had destroyed their family. But Gemma eventually realizes that Ingrid was dealing with the same supernatural forces. Her mother's behavior wasn't necessarily random madness. She was struggling with the Further and the entities connected to it. That realization allows Gemma to understand her mother differently. Instead of simply remembering Ingrid as someone who failed her, Gemma begins to see that her mother may also have been a victim. And that gives the ending an emotional dimension beyond the horror. What happens after the final battle? The movie doesn't completely close the door on Gemma's story. That's important because Insidious, Out of the Further introduces a supernatural ability that could potentially reshape the franchise. Gemma isn't simply someone who can enter the Further. She's someone who can move things between dimensions. That makes her potentially one of the most powerful characters introduced in the series. And although the film gives her a victory, it doesn't necessarily mean the Further is gone. The realm still exists. The spirits are still there. And Gemma's connection to it hasn't disappeared. What does the post-credit scene mean? Yes, Insidious, Out of the Further has a post-credit scene. The scene focuses on Cyrus after his defeat. He has failed to deliver on his promise of helping other spirits escape the Further. And those spirits aren't particularly forgiving. The scene includes a darkly humorous appearance by a demon dentist, connecting back to Gemma's profession. Cyrus ultimately becomes the victim of the very supernatural forces he was trying to unleash. It's a surprisingly funny moment for an Insidious movie, but it also confirms that Cyrus' story is effectively over. Is Gemma the new Elise? Not exactly. But the comparison is obvious. Elise is someone who understands the Further and helps others navigate it. Gemma is something different. Her ability gives her a much more direct connection to the physical world. That makes her less like an investigator and more like a living bridge between dimensions. If the franchise continues with Gemma, her story could explore the consequences of having that kind of power. Because being able to bring things out of the Further isn't necessarily a gift. It could become a curse. Final answer. So, what really happens at the end of Insidious? Out of the Further? Gemma finally understands that her supernatural ability allows her to move not only herself, but also objects and entities between the Further and the real world. Cyrus wants to exploit that ability so he and his followers can escape the Further. But Gemma turns the plan against him. With Elise's guidance, she clears her mind and realizes that she doesn't need to fight the demons one by one. Instead, she uses her power on something much bigger. She transports her entire house into the Further, taking the demons with it. That traps the entities inside their own supernatural realm and prevents Cyrus from escaping. Gemma survives. Maya survives. And Gemma finally understands the truth about her family's connection to the Further. The post-credit scene then confirms that Cyrus has been defeated and punished by the very entities he promised to help. But the ending leaves one important possibility open. The Further still exists. Gemma's ability still exists. and now she knows exactly what she can do. So while Insidious, Out of the Further gives Gemma a victory, it doesn't necessarily end her supernatural journey. In fact, it may have just begun. Because for the first time in the franchise, the question isn't simply, how do we escape the Further? It's, what happens when someone can bring the Further into our world and send our world back? And Gemma may be the most powerful person we've seen who can do exactly that.